I believe this has been missed, and I've put the full clip of what I'm going to be dealing with here on Twitter for reposting if you feel the inclination. During the COVID inquiry a couple of days ago, Chris Whitty went out of his way to put on the record that coverings of the facial features, and I'm going back into YouTube COVID censorship mode, which I thought I'd seen the last of, they have no value in real-world circumstances, and this was while he was being encouraged to promote their use. We had compulsory such things for a year or so during the early COVID period, and other demented regimes around the world had things much worse than we did, like compulsory in the open air, in the fresh air, and compulsory when you were eating your food. And this has to have been the single biggest ever social bone of contention. Did any of the people back then who were encouraging their use tell you that since nobody in the general public actually knows how to use them, they have no value, so there was no point even in encouraging their use, much less making them compulsory?
We've been told that as part of the classification of COVID as an HSID, there is effectively a PPE kit that is required to be worn, which includes FFP3 masks. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah.
He did mean yes, not no there. So we've established exactly what it is that we're talking about.
There is effectively a PPE kit that is required to be worn, which includes FFP3 masks. Is that correct?
That is correct.
There is no disputing here that the subject under discussion is covering of the facial features.
And are you able to confirm that the declassification of COVID as an HSID does not have any bearing on what IPC measures are thereafter recommended to be worn?
That is also correct.
She's urging Whitty to say here that COVID's weakening as an infectious disease, becoming less deadly, has no bearing on equipment recommendation, which is coverings of the facial features. And she then repeats the same question after Whitty's already answered it.
So it could be declassified and FFP3 could continue to be recommended, a mixture of masks, no masks depending on the circumstances.
This is a woman who is on a mission to see the human race walking around in facial coverings for the rest of eternity. But her repeating that question to him, which he had already answered, was a mistake, because he then took the opportunity to blow the entire thing out of the water with this quietly uttered caveat, which he proceeds by saying, this has already been mentioned, but it's not really been picked up on.
Yes, and I think to highlight one point which has come up in various witnesses not fully been picked up, I think.
Well, what a surprise that isn't in the slightest.
Is you've got the kit, but you also have to have the training to use the kit properly. People who work in HSIDs and indeed work in infectious disease units, I'm one of them, are trained to use multiple different forms of PPE at quite a high level. You go through training to do that, you practice that training, people take fit testing very seriously and they're ready for it. All of these things are not going to be true outside that system.
Okay, and for those of us who are outside the system in the general public, what?
And just having kit but no training often produces little or no benefit. The training is fundamental to making the kit useful.
I think we should hear that one over again.
You've got the kit, but you also have to have the training to use the kit properly. People who work in HSIDs and indeed work in infectious disease units, I'm one of them, are trained to use multiple different forms of PPE at quite a high level. You go through training to do that, you practice that training, people take fit testing very seriously and they're ready for it. All of these things are not going to be true outside that system. And just having kit but no training often produces little or no benefit. The training is fundamental to making the kit useful.
Medical practitioners don't need to be told this. As he says, he's talking about their use in the general public. Those, as he says, outside the system. And his point is,
just having kit but no training often produces little or no benefit. The training is fundamental to making the kit useful.
This is the then head health honcho saying that coverings of the facial features in real world circumstances in the general public are useless, because the general public doesn't know how to wear them properly, they put them in their pocket after use, they put them on the table in a cafe or whatever. They're basically useless. And it was just a few minutes after this that Whitty made his comments about exaggeration that have got a lot of traction, and I'm going to mention that here as well because the context has been missed. Whitty was being challenged about communicating the long-term effects of COVID way back then to the general public, and he was saying that loading that additional kind of fear onto the public would have been counterproductive. And this demented woman is not happy about that at all.
You can't say that it wouldn't have had an impact because we don't know what impact it would have had if it had been given.
You can't say that the public would not have been even more terrified into even greater compliance because you didn't try. So she's challenging her acknowledged expert here about him saying that more fear porn would have actually been counterproductive. Then we got this.
I tell you what I wanted to ask you was, do you think in the event of a future pandemic, you should be warned? Try to keep yourself safe, because if you get it, you might die. If you don't get it, you may still suffer a long-term health consequence. That could be as bad as X. We don't know yet how bad it will be, but why do you think that messaging might not land with the public in the future?
Because you didn't get it. Did you hear that question?
If you don't get it, you may still suffer a long-term health consequence.
If you don't get it, you might still suffer long-term health consequences. That has to be a misspeak, because it's impossible, because if you don't get it, you can't suffer the consequences of getting it. But assuming it is a misspeak, it's a Freudian misspeak. It comes out of her desperation to push this "why weren't we more draconian" line. And this was Whitty's response.
Well, I think there's a thing we definitely should use to bear in mind in the future, and there's something which I'm a bit more cautious about. I worried at the beginning, I still worry actually in retrospect, about did we get the level of concern right? Were we either over-pitching it so that people were incredibly afraid of something where in fact their actuarial risk was low, or were we not pitching it enough and therefore people didn't realise the risk they were walking into? I think that balance is really hard, and arguably some people would say we, if anything, overdid it rather than underdid at the beginning. I'm just saying that there's a range of opinions on that.
When he says some people would say, I believe he means I would say, otherwise why is he saying something that other people say that he doesn't agree with? So here we have Chris Whitty, public health head honcho, telling us that in real-world circumstances, i.e. when used by untrained members of the general public in a mandate, then coverings of the facial features are useless.
Just having kit but no training often produces little or no benefit. The training is fundamental to making the kit useful.
And he also tells us that he believes the risks might have been exaggerated.
Did we get the level of concern right? Arguably, some people would say we, if anything, overdid it rather than underdid at the beginning.
Both of these honest revelations from Chris Whitty, and they are honest revelations, came as a result of him being pushed by the COVID inquiry to say things that were unhelpful. Everybody should be wearing facial coverings all of the time, irrespective of the weakening nature of the infectious disease in question, correct? To which Whitty says, well, actually, wearing them on the part of the general public is basically useless. And also, why didn't you dial up the fear porn factor even more back then? To which Whitty says, actually, I think we actually dialed it up too much. It would certainly have been useful to have this revelation about the covering of the facial features back then. But at least we'll know for next time.
Just having kit but no training often produces little or no benefit. The training is fundamental to making the kit useful.